there's been a lot of destruction. There's been a lot of falling away. That's what happened, because my whole world was church, church, church. And when I came out, a lot of people sort of scattered. And now I have a new opportunity to build my chosen family and to connect with people and show them me.
Hello and welcome to Out Loud. Out Loud is a podcast by and for queer people of faith in the South. Here we tell our stories of varied religious upbringings, messy coming outs, and the gift of community with one another. The voice you just heard was Kashif Andrew Graham. My conversation with Kashif ebbs and flows through his experience of coming out to his Pentecostal family and friends, as well as other institutions here in the South. In what he refers to as his Deliverance Years, Kashif has gone from praying that God would change his sexuality to thanking God for being gay. His story is one of moving away from shame and into acceptance, with strong doses of reality that are refreshingly punctuated by laughter. As a librarian for religion and theology at Vanderbilt University's Divinity Library, Kashif carries a reverence for the written word. He reminded me of that old adage that you are what you read, and he shares with us the story of how the small but powerful gesture of handing a book to someone at just the right moment has the power to change us at our core. Kashif identifies as a queer Jamaican American with the gender pronouns he, him, his. If you want to view the transcript or learn more about the resources mentioned in this episode, head on over to outloudstories.com while you're listening. And while you're there, take a look at our new partners page. We want to make sure that churches hear our stories and that you know about churches that are open and affirming to you attending their services. That's why we're partnering with churches throughout Middle Tennessee and listing them on our site for you to see. If you know of a church that should be on our list, reach out and let us know. Just visit outloudstories.com/partners to learn more. And now, let's hear from Kashif Andrew Graham. So, welcome to the show, Kashif.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
It's great to have you.
Yeah.
So I want to just kind of dive right in. Can you tell me about your faith just growing up?
Mm-hmm. So I grew up Church of God, Pentecostal. Now there's a Church of God, the head office, which is actually here in the state of Tennessee, in Cleveland, Tennessee. But the Jamaican Church of God has all these sort of different flavors, if you will. Much more, I think, emotive, a lot more emphasis on, what you're wearing and all of that. So the faith of my childhood was really colorful. It was jumping and shouting. It was faith in action. It was handing out tracts. We were at church all the time. And faith was everything. As like teenagers, we fasted when the church was having fasting and prayer. When I say we, I mean my sisters and I. So faith was real. It wasn't just sort of sequestered into one day, but it was a lifestyle, is what we would have said then. Yeah.
Was there like a spiritual leader in your family, like someone who was like really kind of reining it in for you guys?
Mm-hmm. Sister Esther, my mother. My mother was a spiritual leader. Lord have mercy. I mean, oh God, Greg, I could tell you. Even I remember being back in Jamaica, and my mother, we were in this country church, and I didn't know. I had never seen my mother preach before, but I remember I was sitting in the pew. There were like 10 pews, maybe less than that. And I look up, and there's my mother with her hair tied in a bun, and she had a robe on, and she was preaching something about being locked in to the plane and taking off, no turning back. We'd hear her in the evenings praying in the living room, crying out from her belly, "Adam, where art thou? Adam!" I mean, whatever. It could be anything. And it's like, how are you going to sit in your room and smoke weed when your mother is praying like that in the living room? You can't do that. So.
No.
But my mother's definitely the spiritual leader. Definitely.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. And so what did, what effect did that have on you and like your faith over time? I mean, did that rub off on you?
It's interesting because I remember going through this text. Now, let's see if I can remember it, but I believe it was Birth of the Living God, Anna Maria Rizzuto, where she talks about the deconstruction of your image of God. And I realized that my mother was the image of God for me. And so my parents are very conservative, and working through my sexuality, there was a point in time where I thought, okay, this is just something I'm struggling with. And if I try hard enough, if I can sort of, quote unquote, stay pure, stay clean from having what I said then was a homosexual thought, I could, be free. And so my mother, of course, very much supported this. And whenever something happened, if I didn't, quote unquote, do particularly well that day, I would feel that God was upset with me, but that God was doing sort of the passive aggressive things that my mother did. And it's very interesting that I didn't realize that had been the case until I came to seminary and started to unpack all of that. And I thought, oh my God, yeah, my mother was definitely growing up the image of God for me.
So when were you asking questions about your sexuality? Was that when you were living at home and
Oh yeah,
under your mom's roof?
yeah. With my parents, I think. So for me, I sort of, just because I love literature and I'm a librarian, and but I look at my life as a sort of three major sections, if you will. This will change in the future, but there are what I call the early years, which are up until sort of birth, until maybe about 12 or 13. And then there's the deliverance years, which is from 14 to 23. And then there's present day, if you will. But the deliverance years, I mark that sort of cut out for me in the sense that was the time in which I started to seek healing for my brokenness and seek deliverance. And so I talk about, I might say at the beginning of the deliverance years or the height of the deliverance years, which was when I went for a year and a half without masturbating. But for me, and when I realized that how unhealthy some of my behaviors were, that's when I started to ask about other ways of living, because I was miserable.
Yeah.
And I thought, every summer I'm not going to be able to continue this business of looking at the ground because I don't want to lust with my eyes. And, it was a very, very difficult time. But it was also, my journey had always been very public, in the sense that because I come from a community that believes that testifying is how you get your healing, I had to, quote unquote, I had to talk about what I was dealing with.
Yeah.
And so during testimony service, I said these things out loud. Now, the community that I grew up in, and many Jamaican communities, are not only, homophobic, but dangerously so. Yeah. That, in Jamaica, you could still be killed for being gay. I mean, it's not a pretty situation.
Yeah.
But I had to, I opened out and shared a lot of things that I was dealing with. And I think that I would say that it was good and bad in that it marked me for certain people, that I wouldn't be good enough for their daughters because I was, sullied, or I could never be a real man. And so, yeah, it was very challenging, but I was asking those questions about my sexuality, and from the beginning, from as soon as this sort of thing emerged.
And you were asking those questions publicly, or
yeah,
that was part of the testimony.
Yeah, it was. But the thing is that I think that from the time I was very young, that my mother in particular knew, because mothers know, but she proceeded to say, she sort of warned me that this would not be okay. That she said, if I should ever discover this, I would roll over in my grave, things like that. So from the time I discovered this thing, that, my sexuality began to was sort of a sapling and sort of broke ground, it was immediately hit by shame. And I knew, okay, I am sexual, but in the wrong way. And so, yeah, that I lived through that until I came to seminary.
Would you have identified as being gay or being queer then, or was it
Mm-mm.
was it just more about behavior, and that's what you were admitting?
For me, there was no such thing as a gay Christian.
Right.
And
Okay.
there was no option, no. So when I talk about asking questions, let me just clarify. It was more about a declaration. I would say it was less of a question and more of a declaration, in the sense that I'm healed, I'm delivered from this. Maybe I was asking, does God still love me even though I have same-sex attraction, or I have, and I didn't even use that term then.
Yeah.
Even though I'm having these feelings, is what I would say.
Yeah.
That I mean, the amount of time, if I need to get that on a T-shirt, these feelings. But that was probably more of where my questioning was. But I wasn't asking those questions then of whether it was possible to be both queer and a Christian, because for me the answer was no in those years.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Yeah.
and even I remember, I'll tell you this, reading Pursuing Sexual Wholeness, which is Andrew Comiskey's book. Someone actually gave that book to me at church, and she sort of came like by night, so to speak, just very quietly, and after Sunday school, and it was a little book, and she placed it into my hand and said, I saw this at a conference and I thought of you. And oh my gosh, Greg, I read that book and cried. The reason I cried was because it was the first time, although, Andrew Comiskey is sort of not affirming, in the sense that he does not believe that it is possible to be, a sexually active queer Christian. So let me not say non-affirming and put a label on it, but let me just say that our views don't align anymore. But the way that he talked about this business of grieving, and he says in the book, that he went through a period where he would cry in his pillow because he was grieving sort of the lost masculinity. And that is it's problematic now, but I understood then, the way that I understood it was grieving the lost years that I had spent sort of so anxious about every hand movement and gesture and every inflection. And so when I read that, it gave me permission to cry. And for the first time, I began to cry about my situation. There were a lot of tears. But it led me down a journey of continuing to read and seek. And ultimately, when I got to seminary, and I was in the middle of my seminary journey, that's when I started to that's when it intensified. And I was ripping through books, and finding, because the library that I was working at unfortunately did practice censorship, and they just didn't have certain books. I had to request them by interlibrary loan, and I would say that they were for a paper. They weren't for no paper. They were for me, because I would go home and I read those voraciously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness! Wow. Where I'm really intrigued so far about hearing your story is how similar and different it is to mine. In that, like, in the Catholic Church, there is this same kind of testimony, if you will, through the sacrament of confession. You go to the priest, you confess your sins, but it's totally private. So you can go through this whole journey of, are my attractions misguided or whatever? You could go through that whole journey just between you and a priest who can't even talk to you about it afterwards. They are kept. They cannot disclose what happens in the confessional, and so it becomes this extremely personal and shameful journey. And yet I feel like we kind of took the same path, where it was like, at some point you had to kind of just really dig into what you could find. Like for you, it was all these books that started to open up the answers, even though you were like publicly, even though you had confessed this to everyone.
Oh yeah,
it was still your journey to kind of find the answer that worked for you.
I wanted it so badly, Greg. I wanted to be straight so badly. I wanted to do what was right. I would cry. This story has hope, folks. So don't stop listening, okay? But I would cry by my window in my room in New York and ask God to make me whole. Lord, make me whole.
Yeah. And
God did make me whole.
Yeah.
But that's coming. But in the sense that I wanted it so badly, and so I remember there was a scripture, something like the angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. And I was reading it one night before church, and I felt like I needed to confess in front of my church. And I was the choir director at the time. So before the choir would get up and sing, someone would introduce the song, and they would say, the song that we're going to sing for you says, Beulah Land, how I love him, or something like this. And then the choir would start. And they would give a short word of exhortation. But for me, that was my opportunity.
Yeah. And
so and there was a guest speaker there that day, someone who self-identified as an apostle. And she had a very shock and awe, a very, I don't want to use the word wacky, but a very unusual ministry. And I got up in front of everybody. The choir was standing there, and I said, I have been healed. I've been delivered from pornography, masturbation, and homosexuality. And when I tell you, Greg, everybody in the church stood up, and it was like an eruption. And I remember the minister, she was wearing purple. She had a purple robe and a purple headdress. And she said, all y'all should be up here hugging him right now. And she closed her Bible and said, he preached my sermon. And everybody from the church, there were lines of people coming down to hug me and people who went to the altar. And it was, for me, although today I look at that and I say, I knew what I really wanted was to be able to accept myself and to be able to be happy. I just wanted to be happy. I recognize the power in telling the truth and the power in speaking. So perhaps my truth wasn't that I had been, quote unquote, delivered from, but my truth was, this is what I'm dealing with. And I recognize that when we share our stories, there is a great power in helping people to lead better lives.
What I love when I'm hearing again and again as you're talking is that you're starting to grab like what you need from your faith, and there are things that haven't worked for you.
Right.
And instead of, and this has come up in other interviews too, instead of just disowning the whole thing and being like, nope, this church doesn't want me, I'm out. You've found pieces of it that work, and I feel like that is again and again kind of the path that so many of us do take, is that faith still means something to us. These rituals, these practices, this prayer, whatever it is, like there's something about it that is working, and it's our connection to the divine. And I love that. So with that in mind, I'm curious, like how would you characterize like your prayer life during this deliverance period?
Oh my. That is a heavy question. Heavy, baby. Well, I would say that prayer for me was all about confession and asking for help. I remember reading there was a psalm that had been translated. I can't remember which translation or paraphrase, but it was something like David saying, I'm wiped out. And I remember that stuck with me because I was in the Bronx at the time as an undergrad at Lehman College. And it was summer, and there were all of these hot men wearing just, tank tops. There was a point in time when I wouldn't even walk by the gym, the rec center, because I was like, somebody's going to walk out with like bulging muscles, and I'm going to have a thought, and I'm not going to be able, for me, shunning the very appearance of evil. But prayer was always was supplication, was, God help me to make it through this day, another day. I want to live pure. That was what prayer was. And I prayed a lot because I remember I would come home and lie on my bed and say, I'm wiped out. And for me, that's, as I look back now, I can see where things were cracking. Things were falling apart in the sense that I knew as I was praying that this was no way to live, that there was better. There was another way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as I reflect on my life, for anybody to ask me to go back to that, I have to shut them down. I can't even entertain that because life, we're supposed to live, a life well supplied. Mm-hmm. And that for me it was self-hate and it was destructive. Mm-hmm. But prayer took the place of continuing to indicate, quote unquote, to tell God that I did not want this lifestyle. I didn't want to be this way, to remind God at every chance that I wanted to be whole and I really needed this. But it was, my life had already been sort of planned out in the sense that it was, you grew up through Sunday school. In the Pentecostal churches, you get filled with the Holy Spirit. Then it's time for marriage. But this thing was stopping me from going to the next step and moving on with my life and becoming this PTA dad and living in the suburbs with a station wagon. That was my plan.
Totally.
Okay, I had that written in my vision book. But my being gay was stopping me, this thing at the time. And so I was praying for that to be removed so that I could go on with my life. So they had, I was at the altar every Sunday. They would have what they called ministry moment, and I would go down. And at every single chance I got, I would ask people if they said, is there anything I can pray for you about? I shared or asked them to, pray for strength for me. That's what prayer was.
So getting back to kind of what sounded like your coming out journey, kind of taking a turn at seminary, what was, like, the books that you were reading then, what was starting to shift then?
So it's interesting. I think the first thing was being away from my family and the community that I had known.
Yeah.
Because for the first time, I was able to get into my own head and think, how do I really feel about things? I wasn't so enmeshed, and I was away, and I would get on the back roads and drive through all these small towns in East Tennessee and face myself. I think that's where things started. So I mentioned The Birth of the Living God, Anna Maria Rizzuto. I was reading Velvet Rage. Oh my gosh, there are so many. How to Survive a Summer, Boy Erased, God and the Gay Christian, of course. So I think reading those things, and I did have one faculty member when I was in seminary that no longer works at the seminary. So don't try anything, y'all. But, he was very, very supportive. And it's interesting because, so we were at this restaurant and I wanted to sort of start to come out to him. I wasn't out to myself though, but I guess I was. But I wanted to share with him where I was in my journey.
Yeah.
And he had been sort of the nutty professor for me. When I took my first semester in seminary and I took a class with him, and I was like, what on earth is this guy talking about? Like, just, he was saying things that were so new to me. Like, what if some, passages or things in the Old Testament are stories, are not factual, but are meant to inspire faith? And I was like, what? I was like losing my mind. Like, this guy's the devil. How is he here at the Pentecostal Theological Seminary? And, he was the one that I went to. And we had dinner, and I was struggling, and he said, you have to make this decision. What he said, what I'm feeling from you is that you have to make this decision, and you want to do the right thing, but you don't know how. And I want to tell you that there are bounds, but the bounds are not nearly as narrow as we have made them. And I remember that thing, that opened a world for me. that opened the world for me.
Yeah.
I mean, and he made himself available. He was the same one that later on in my journey, when I was wondering about dating and like trying to say, I don't really know how to do this, especially because I was in Cleveland. Okay. It's just Cleveland, Tennessee.
I know nothing about Cleveland, Tennessee.
It's kind of slim pickings there. I'm just going to be honest. Okay. Nice people, but it's kind of slim pickings. So you got to go to Chattanooga if you're looking for, you got
to set that radius really wide.
You do. I'm like, you got to go 100 miles. That's it. But he was the one that I went to with my concerns, and he said to me that goodness is it will find you. And I thought, wow, that's something that stayed with me. Goodness will find you. So, I was in the middle of my journey asking these questions. I should also mention that luckily enough, so I had been to a couple of different churches, and the last church that I attended, the pastor was also on faculty at the seminary, and he was the first person that I ever uttered those words to, that I ever said, I am gay and a Christian. But it started with a question. So we had a conversation over a number of weeks. Is it possible to be both queer and a Christian? Now, I have to say this. Keep listening, folks. I was going to gay conversion therapy at that time.
Oh, wow.
I was going to gay conversion therapy, and I was in Chattanooga. And when he found out, I didn't know what was happening at the time, but we had breakfast, and I told him that I was going to see this counselor, and he didn't really like it. And I was wondering why, because I thought, you are a Church of God pastor, like you should be, I mean, he didn't grow up in the Church of God, but like you're pastoring a Church of God church, you should be like, yeah, you should be on board. You should be like giving me a ribbon or something, And he said to me, he was trying to get me to see somebody else, which I thought was very interesting. And he said, maybe they don't necessarily have to be a person of faith. I didn't know. At the time he's saying this, I'm saying, what is this guy talking about? He's a pastor, you know? But he said that to me, and I remember we were there in small town USA, and I'm thinking, this is kind of odd. So when that morning also, I was planning to sort of profess to him that I was healed, because I was still, that was the ending of the Deliverance Years, but I was still there, and I said to him, and he said, well, let's not be too quick to put a label on anything. And that kind of, though, threw me into a tailspin, because I wanted this to be over. I wanted to move on. I had a young lady that I, had been waiting on me in New York, and I was concerned I was going to lose her, even though she wasn't really waiting on me. But so I wanted that to be over, and he wouldn't let me, which is interesting. And it ended up being the most helpful thing that he said to me. He started small. There were baby steps. Let's not put a label on this. Why don't you see somebody else? The small suggestions. And I did go and see somebody else. And she was a Southern belle that is in the Church of God. And I got in to see her and sat on her couch. And I remember she just in the sweetest voice said to me, honey, I just want to tell you, there is nothing wrong with you. And that was deliverance for me.
Yeah.
That was deliverance.
There you go.
That was a moment of breaking, because in all my years at that point, no one had ever said that to me. No one had ever said that to me. Nothing is wrong with you. And I will sort of add as a disclaimer or qualify that maybe if there were one or two people that did, I couldn't hear them, because I had this sort of evangelical gawk in my ears that I couldn't, I wasn't able to see myself.
Was just turned up too loud.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So, but when she said that, that's when things started to break for me. Yeah.
God bless her.
Oh yeah. It is an amazing experience to sit with someone that listens to you and doesn't think that because of your sexuality you're inherently sinful.
Yeah. It's freeing. I mean, it's huge.
Yeah.
To actually have the courage at that stage to even admit that I'm gay, or I'm even having these feelings. That is so. it takes so much courage to say that to someone.
And then when somebody basically says, I have to tell you, as though it's like, I don't know, like they're an insurance agent and they're reading a clause or something.
Right.
Like, I
like
have
your
to tell
Miranda
you.
rights or something.
Yeah, like they're Mirandizing you. Like, hello, they have to tell you that you're going to go to hell. And it's just like,
No.
And the sad part, though, I have to say, is that when I did come out, which was on my blog in 2017, December 2nd, 2017.
Which is pretty recent.
Yeah. This has been a journey.
You're about as new on the block as I am.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's just gone so quickly. But when I came out, there were people who responded in that way, that they were like, they felt obligated. And it's interesting because they didn't tell me that right away. Mm-hmm. For some of them, I think, I was reflecting on this the other day, I was trying to go on as though things were sort of okay or hadn't changed, because I thought that they knew. Because towards the end of my journey, I was not trying to hide. I stopped sort of self-censoring and I let myself be me. And I would say things like, honey, or whatever, whatever I felt like saying. And it's interesting because then there's some people who are like, someone literally said that to me, that he had no idea. I thought, okay, I know we're in the South, but if somebody's saying to you like honey and like flipping their wrist, I mean, come on. I was trying to signal to you, Yeah. So it's very interesting, though, that I think that they felt that maybe I was too comfortable with them. And so then those things started to emerge slowly. One person said to me, I'm sorry, I can't come to your hypothetical wedding, or I don't know if I could come to your hypothetical wedding. One person felt that she needed to warn me that, when she was in the homosexual lifestyle, that it was filled with drugs and this and that. And I thought, what has happened to critical reasoning? What happened to us being able to delineate and look at our life and say, this was my sexuality, these are the substances I took. But I know that, that's how she has that's what she thought about her journey. And that's up to her. But it was very interesting that it took time for some of those things to emerge.
Yeah.
From people that I knew and loved. And that was the hardest.
When you went into seminary, what was your kind of objective of going to seminary professionally, I guess, and how did that shift by the time you were done?
So this is a great question. I went to seminary because I had a lot of questions, and my plan was to go into full-time ministry, and I was going to be a children's pastor. And so I was reading all these books about family, and I remember my mother was the one that mentioned it to me, that said, I think you'd make a fabulous children's pastor. And I thought, yeah, okay. I discovered while I was there, number one, I served at a children's camp in Mentone, Alabama. I mean, it was a travesty. I was like, I realized, I was like, I can't stand these kids. It's not that I don't want kids. I mean, one or two kids for me to take care of it, that's a different story. But to be a children's pastor and to offer them the care and the attention that they needed in such formational years, I wasn't at the place to offer that.
Yeah, you got to be on board for that.
I just thought I couldn't do it. And not to mention, we were at a Bible camp where they apparently, I guess they didn't believe in caffeine or something like this. And so somebody had to go down the mountain, because I went to the director and I was like, excuse me, you're not going to have me here for a whole week with like decaf, basically serving me like burnt corn husks and not even real coffee. I was so angry. I take my coffee very seriously. So somebody had to go down the mountain and had to go to Walmart and got regular coffee, and it was fine. But I realized that wasn't my calling. I wonder now how much of that was the coffee.
How much of your life has been determined by coffee?
Yeah, seriously, come on. Even the man I will marry is going to be determined by coffee, okay? Okay, that was the one thing. The second thing was being in seminary, and again, talking about the deconstruction. I mentioned this book so much, The Birth of the Living God, but it was really the class, Human Growth and Transformation. And talking about the deconstruction of the image of God, I realized that it had been my mother who, in her own disappointments in my father and the men in the community, they were always, that was a large part of that appeared quite frequently in the rhetoric, was, men who abdicated their priesthood in the home and so on and so forth, which was then informed by a larger conversation, conservative conversation, about the breakdown of a black family. So we see where these things sort of seep into the church. And I think that my mother, rather than address those concerns head on, sort of placed pressure on me to say, well, you'd be a good children's pastor, you need to be a hero for your sisters, so on and so forth. And I never realized what that was doing to me, that placed a lot of unnecessary weight on me. And so I was in seminary, and I remember being outside of the dorms, the apartments, and in my car, crying on the phone, and it was very late at night, and I said it to her, that I never wanted to do this. I never wanted to become a children's pastor. I didn't want to do that. That was you. And I now, looking back, sort of in retrospect and reverie, I'm surprised at the clarity that I had. I never really realized that until this moment. Such clarity that I'm also such boldness. Actually, it's because I was in Tennessee that I was able to pick up the phone and say that to my Jamaican mother, because she couldn't smack me in the face. But I did have clarity in that moment because I was away again and reflecting, looking back on where I had come from. I think that sort of broke things apart for me, that I realized, okay, I am not going to go into children's ministry. I was still thinking of going into some sort of ministry, and at that point I thought, well, I really wanted to be a writer. That's what I really wanted to do. But it took me a while to sort of make my way there. So just sort of to fast forward to the end of my seminary journey, May of 2017, actually this was March, that I was on the phone with my mother. And I remember saying to her, I was outside of the library, because I was working in a library at the time. I was outside of the library, and I was standing in the parking lot, and I said, I'm going to do another master's, and I'm going to do a Master of Science in Information Science through the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. And my mother was like, are you sure you want to do that? Because for her, the fact that I was not pursuing ordination was like I was a failure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And for her, becoming a librarian was like, what on earth? Like, that was not, for her, it came out of left field. Although libraries had always been safe places for me throughout school and all of that. Yeah. So my decision was then that I would become a theological librarian, because I learned about this business of theological librarianship as ministry. That moved me. It's faith-seeking understanding.
Totally.
Yeah. And so the person comes to you and you offer them the resource, and then you sort of carry them as they wrestle with the text. Mm-hmm. So I do think that librarians are should be ubiquitous to the research process, but theological librarians, I think, carry the students in a certain way, because I understand that when I slide, a book across the table, so to speak, to you, I know the weight because I've been there. Yeah. Because I remember what happened when I was reading all of this and I was in seminary and I thought I was going crazy. And there was a professor that said, this is the wonderful thing, though, about going to a Pentecostal seminary. There was sort of always a divine word that somebody could be teaching, and they would break out into something in just a second. They would break out into a 30-second sermon. And so she said, you feel faithless. You feel like God is dead, that Christ is dead for you. But I have a word for you. Stay at the tomb. Oh, that could make me shout right now, y'all, right here in Nashville, Tennessee. I mean, that's what she said. Stay at the tomb. And I understood what she was saying. She said, you feel like your faith is being deconstructed, but I have a word for you. Stay at the tomb. And so that was so important. And I know that that's what students at Vanderbilt Divinity School, at any theological, school for theological education, that they're dealing with that. Yeah. And as a librarian, I'm aware of like the implications of like, I'm handing this to you, but this may break you. You're going to have to wrestle with this. Mm-hmm. And so I think of that as ministry. It's dialogue. And even as you, like I had a student come to me the other day, and I sat back and I said to her, I was like, what do you really want to ask?
Yeah.
There's something that you are being told that you feel like you should want to ask, but that you don't care about that. I don't, from what the vibes that I'm getting from you, don't care about that. There is something that you really want to ask. Go for that, because then you'll be able to sustain, like you're actually going to be interested in that, you know? But that's definitely the work of a librarian. And when it comes to the theological disciplines, I think more so, because we are discerners, we are thinkers, that the word, so to speak, and with a capital W, rolls around in our brains, and we think, what does that mean? You know, even the other day I was walking in the Belmont Hillsborough area, and this scripture came back to me, to walk in the newness of life. And it was rolling around in my brain, and I thought to myself, wow, I used to think about that as like becoming a Christian, and now, you know, tossing out your weed and your alcohol or whatever. And now I think about that as like, this is a new sense about life.
Yeah.
I have a new perspective. My vision has been given to me, has been adjusted so that I feel like I'm seeing rightly with more clarity than I have ever seen before. And that makes life new. And so I walk in that newness every day.
Yeah. I mean, and I feel like that newness, I feel like I experienced that newness in two different ways. One, basically like ever since I came out, there's been that newness of just like, this is my identity, like slowly kind of letting that be a part of my identity, and seeing the world through the lens of being a gay man. But then there's also this, you know, after the excitement of coming out kind of wears off, then there's the newness too, of being open to something new happening every day, of constantly staying curious about things too. That is just so important as we all go on to work our 9-to-5 jobs and have routines that we get settled in, to like embrace and be open to the new.
Well, then, and the newness, there was someone who, a therapist, who talked about second adolescence.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was so powerful. I wrote a poem actually about it. That was like, it was like learning to breathe again, because again, this life is so new in fact, because I was never allowed, like having a crush on a guy wasn't okay. So I never let myself feel the butterflies when I had just a casual crush, or when I would see a guy and go, wow, you know, and now that's okay. Right. And it's normal. It's healthy.
Yes.
If you are sexual, you know, you might be asexual and have other ways of, you know, but I mean, so in many ways, this is the newness of life. This is another adolescence. This is like, and then there's also like the anxiety and the fear that comes in. That's normal of, will my crush reciprocate? You know, will I meet someone? Will I get a date to this particular thing? You know, it's so new, and I'm navigating all of that. And sometimes I feel like I'm behind. You know, there are times when I feel like, just because in it's so new, 2017, there are times when I feel like I meet so many gay men that are so beyond, and that know all of these words and know how to do this and know this position and that position. I'm like, you put that where? I'm like, I'm not gonna put that there. Give me another year, maybe. But you know, there's definitely another, like, this is the newness, and I've just learned to take a deep breath and let myself go at the pace that I'm going.
Yeah.
Because I am building a life that I don't want to run away from. And that's the most important thing. That's my gauge. And every decision that I make, is this in service of the life that I wish to lead, of this newness of life? Is this in service of that? And is this in service of me building a life that I don't want to run away from? A life that I'm proud of.
Yeah.
And I am building a life that I'm proud of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
would you characterize your faith and your prayer life now?
That's such a good question. I do something I like to call morning centering. Morning centering could be anything, in the sense that it could be, I usually will get up and I start to try to be thankful that I'm in a body, that I'm awake, and I start trying to get there. I really have to stick away from the devil Instagram in the mornings. I try not to start clicking on things and looking at who didn't like my what and who didn't like this.
Yeah,
and,
it's like a slippery slope.
Yeah,
for the whole
because
day
then you
when
start
do that.
looking through and you're like, she wanted to post that. Oh, okay, girl. No. So it just you don't want those negative thoughts early in the morning. But I start to, so I go to the kitchen. I have coffee going. With the scent of the coffee in the house, I start to think of what I'm thankful for. I start to, whatever thoughts emerge. And that is what prayer looks like to me now. It could be anything, but it's about something growing. I just sit there and let it grow, something. And I feel like that time could take me anywhere. I have presence. That was the thing that came out of that morning centering. I have presence. I matter. Yeah. When I walk into a room, things change in the sense that there's somebody new in the room. I have presence. Why is it that for so long I wasn't thinking about that? Because I was so focused on not being noticed, on just trying to seem as like not as little a disturbance to the atmosphere as possible. And during my morning centering, it was sort of like an undoing of that. I have presence. I matter. So that's what prayer is for me. I pray in the car a lot. I drive on the back roads and I pray aloud. I like to record videos of myself and I'm just talking through whatever I need to talk through.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's me working out a problem and then it may go into a prayer. So I'm in the car and I have my video and I have whatever and I tell myself the truth, how I really feel about something. And usually from there, I can make a decision that's in service, that I'm standing in my truth. Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But that's all prayer. Prayer is all of those things for me. It is, and it can be, I might go into Benton Chapel at the Vanderbilt Divinity School and kneel down in there and pray. I pray anywhere. I really believe in that. So prayer is a broad, beautiful thing for me. That is, it's for me, and it's for me to be aware of others' needs, aware of my own needs. Yeah, I still love to pray, but I'm not begging God to not make me gay anymore. I'm thanking God for making me gay. Seriously, that's the new sort of thing.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you would like to share that we didn't get to?
I think that we are constantly becoming and we are constantly growing. And as I said before, I think it bears repeating, this business of building a life that you don't want to run away from, leading or working in service of the highest possible calling. I hope that I will continue to connect with people that are about their business and are getting in touch with what they feel like they are here for, what they feel like they are called to do. And those are the people that I want, in my inner circle. There's been a lot of carnage. There's been a lot of destruction. There's been a lot of falling away. That's what happened, because my whole world was church, church, church. And when I came out, a lot of people sort of scattered. And now I have a new opportunity to build my chosen family and to connect with people and show them me. I love this statement that I wrote when I was in Vancouver, that Keegan, one of the other librarians, and I talked about this at length. I was writing my Pride post, and she took the picture. That's why we're talking about it. My life is like a movie. And I said, starring Kashif Graham, in brackets, finally, as himself. And it's the most amazing thing.
Yeah.
I get to be me.
Yeah.
I get to be me. And whenever I get into a situation that I feel like someone is trying to push me back and dim my light, I fight for that. I have learned to fight, to be me, to express myself authentically. And I am so excited for the opportunity to just show myself to the world, that I don't have to hide anything. I could just be me. And then when people connect with me, I know they've seen me, they've seen me. And that's the most important thing to me. So thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much for being you and for coming on the show.
A special thanks to Kashif for coming on the show. You can find him on Instagram at Kashif Andrew Graham. You'll find that link in the show notes along with other resources mentioned in this episode. I'm your host, Greg Thompson. Our editor is Carrie Harmon, and our theme music is by JP Ruggieri. We recorded this episode here in Nashville, Tennessee at the We Own This Town studio. And a special thanks this week to Patreon members Megan Lyons, Luke DeBoer, Lauren Peacock, and Meg McKellen for their support. Remember, you can become a member and get access to exclusive digital content and merchandise starting at just $1 a month. Learn more at patreon.com/outloudstories. You can also leave us a one-time donation over on Venmo at OutLoudStories. And if you haven't already, please be sure to leave us a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. It makes a huge difference. And while you're there, hit that subscribe button so you get the latest episodes right when they drop. For more updates, you can find us on social media at Outloud Stories, and you can sign up for our email newsletter on our website at outloudstories.com. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. In the meantime, remember, friends, queer people have faith lives too. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Thanks for listening.